Hello, welcome to another edition of Matt's Chats. This is a series of short videos where I sit and talk to people in and around the whisky industry, and I'm delighted to be here in Kentucky with Bruce Russell, who's the Associate Blender at Wild Turkey. So firstly, Bruce, thank you very much for inviting me over. It's been a great couple of days here in Kentucky, my first time ever, so thank you very much.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, great. And for those people that don't know about Wild Turkey, what would you say to them? Firstly, where have they been, I suppose?
Yeah.
But you know, how would you describe Wild Turkey, the style of whiskey, and what the brand is about?
I think our kind of brand, our distillery operation, everything's kind of built off of my grandfather Jimmy. He's been here since 1954. He started as a 19-year-old kid. He's at work today, just in the room next to us.
Just seen him outside.
Shaking hands and signing bottles and holding court. And he learned from a man that actually made whiskey before Prohibition. So I think what Wild Turkey's all about is this kind of pre-Prohibition, old school, traditional style of making whiskey. And right now, what I think is what Wild Turkey's all about is making whiskey in that pre-Prohibition style, but giving people new and exciting things in the bottle.
Mm. And how would you describe the style of Wild Turkey for someone that hasn't tried it?
I think Wild Turkey is Kentucky bourbon that is big and full of flavor. It's bold, sweet and spicy and oaky, and everything good about American whiskey. Yeah. But it is unapologetically Wild Turkey. You know it's Wild Turkey when you're drinking it, when you're smelling it. It definitely has all of it. Even the stuff that might have my influence on the blending or my dad's influence, it still has that kind of core DNA of Jimmy style.
Because that's what I love about this is that you've got you're the third generation. You've got your dad here, you've got your grandfather here as well. How did you sort of get into it? Was it always kind of the track that you kind of had to follow, or did you kind of find your own way into it?
No, it's you get asked that a lot, and growing up it was something I never really wanted to do. I mean, when you grow up in a place like Lawrenceburg, when I was growing up, this was like 7,500 person town, and Wild Turkey and Four Roses are both here. So everybody worked in bourbon, so it wasn't really a special thing. And I never wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. Not that I didn't like Dad, just I wanted to do my own thing. I was actually in engineering school and wanted to move off to,
almost rebel against it.
Exactly. Move to a big city and, do that kind of thing. And I was working here as a summer job when I was 21 just to have something to do in between classes, and making my $7.25 an hour, thinking, I'm rich at that point. And I worked here about 2 months, and Dad took me aside, and he spent a whole afternoon with me, kind of explaining not just what we do, but why we do it. And growing up, I don't think me and Dad had talked more than 15 minutes to each other. He's really quiet at home. Yeah. He's an introvert. And I was like, oh, wow, I kind of met Dad for the first time ever. And I remember going home and telling my mom, first of all, I can't believe Dad could talk. You saw
a different side to him.
Yeah.
Was that the same with Jimmy as well?
It is, in a different way. I think work brings out kind of a passionate side of Dad that I'd never seen before, and a creative side of him that I didn't know existed. I think for Jimmy, when he's here, it's almost like he's at home. He just becomes more of himself. He's a little funnier. He's a little bit more friendly. He's a little happier. Yeah. Where Dad, I think, does a really good job of separating home and work. This is home for Jimmy. His family's here. His home's here.
Yeah, and that must be, I guess, sort of in the old days of bourbon, there was this sort of family track sort of going through different distilleries, but now it's quite rare, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's pretty common in a lot of industries, right? And yeah, there's a couple of us, me, Freddie Noah over at Beam, and a couple other families that have gotten back into it now that the times are good in American whiskey. But I think that happens a lot. It's hard to do what your dad did, especially if your dad, for a lot of these brands were very famous guys whose names are on bottles to follow in their footsteps. And then,
well, I didn't want to do what my dad did. So I can feel that.
I didn't want to do what my mom did. She was an accountant. And so I went to Mom's work. I came to Dad's work. I was like, man, Dad's work's way more fun,
Yeah. So you're the associate blender here. Can you just sort of explain a little bit about your day-to-day job and what that involves?
Yeah, so I think anybody that's a maker of a brand today, and this is pretty much all spirits, whether it's American whiskey, Scotch whiskey, agave spirits, rum, anything, it's a little bit more involved than it used to be, as far as you're not just in a lab doing stuff anymore. Part of my job is doing brand work, marketing, PR, sales, that type of thing. Part of it is being here in a lab environment and working on blends, whether it's products that are on an everyday shelf or coming up with new things. That's an exciting thing about American whiskey. We come up with new products now, 1, 2, 3, maybe even more a year. Being involved in that's probably my favorite thing I get to do. But I'm also involved in our private barrel program.
It really shows the vibrancy in the market, doesn't it? That you're actually able to create that. If you think of like the bad times of like bourbon and similar times with Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey, the fact that you have the leeway and the demands from consumers to do that is amazing.
Yeah, I think if you would have told consumers, Scotch started to innovate, I think, a little bit faster than us and Irish whiskey did, but if you were to tell some of our consumers, or even Irish whiskey consumers, 20, 30 years ago, there's going to be some big innovation coming, they would have laughed at you. You had a handful of brands, you made one label. We made Wild Turkey 101, that's all we made. And now we're coming up with dozens of things every year, some things specifically for individual markets. It's a really fun time to be involved in blending.
Yeah. And can you just describe sort of a little bit about how you make the Wild Turkey bourbon, like the sort of the mash bill, which is the composition of the grains for those of you that don't know, but also a very quick sort of brief thing about the process of making Wild Turkey.
Yeah, so I think Wild Turkey makes our bourbon in a very traditional way. So our mash bill is pretty traditional. It's 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% barley malt. So we're pretty high in malt, which is more of a traditional thing. We're using all non-GMO grains. My grandfather doesn't even understand completely what a GMO is. So we've kind of stuck to the old school grains. We distill at a low proof, which does give us a little bit more flavoring components, even though it does cost us money in the end. Instead of distilling at a high proof, put it into the barrel at a low proof, we put it into the bottle at a high proof. So we're trying to add as little water as possible after it comes out of that barrel. And I think another big thing with Wild Turkey, average age here for our bourbons is around 8 to 10 years old. A lot of our competitors are 4, 5, and 6. Not to say that they're not making good whiskey. I think a lot of them are. But my grandfather's all about 6 to 12-year-old whiskey, and his perfect age is right around 8. And that's really influenced everything we've done.
You feel for Wild Turkey particularly.
He likes 8. Dad likes 6 to 12. Dad likes really 10 and up. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I like about 8 to 14, 15.
Yeah, so is there ever any arguments between the three of you as to...
Yeah, but I'm smarter than they are, so if they argue, I just jump on Jimmy's side, and we gang up on Dad usually.
Yeah. So you talked about the makeup of the mash bill. Can you just quickly, for those people that don't know, just very basically describe the process of making Wild Turkey bourbon?
So we take our corn, our rye, and our malted barley, then we mill that down. Basically, you crush it into smaller particles. You cook those grains at different temperatures. You take that cooked grain with a little bit of our yeast. We have a yeast strain that's ours. It's proprietary. It's been around since the early 1900s, at least, that we know of. We ferment those grains with that yeast, and we make beer. So if you've ever been to a brewery, if you don't know that much about whiskey, very similar to making beer. And then we're going to take that beer that we've made, that fermented mash, it's about 12 or 15% alcohol, and then we're going to distill it, upwards into like 65% alcohol, 62.5, I think, off the first still, and then a little bit higher off the second still. And that's how we get our spirit. The big difference I think most people should know about bourbon whiskey, straight bourbon whiskey, which is what we're making, after it comes off that still, we have to put it into a new charred oak container. No other spirit in the world has that law, and that really does, I think, separate American whiskey and bourbon and straight rye from every other spirit.
Yeah, thank you. And just finally, before we go, you mentioned the 101, very famous bourbon.
Yeah.
Obviously something the 3 generations of you are very proud of. We've actually got a bottle just here, the Wild Turkey 101. And we're actually going to do a little tasting.
Let's do it.
So see what flavours we get, and let's have a little smell and a taste. And
cheers.
Cheers. You're right, it is quite big and bold, isn't it?
It is, especially for something that is. It's not the oldest whiskey we have. This is a blend of 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9-year-old barrels. Average age right around 7 right now, and 101 proof. Which when a lot of people know 101 from when they're younger, and they're wow 101. But in today's environment, 101's pretty low, pretty typical proof. 100 is a common proof for a lot of people. Much higher proofs now becoming more common. But it is. It's big. It's full of flavor. Someone said earlier today it's very assertive. And I like that, assertive or bold, yeah.
Yeah, let's have a taste. Yeah, that is lovely, isn't it?
You get a lot of that very traditional caramel, vanilla, and oak that you're going to find on all bourbons. I think the thing that kind of separates us, and I think every whiskey distillery in Kentucky has its own kind of unique flavor that you can pick up. Some distilleries will have like a fruit note. Some distilleries will have a nuttiness. I think ours is a mid-palate spice. We get a lot of like clove, black pepper, cinnamon.
Yeah. So it's almost like sort of DNA of the fingerprint, or
absolutely.
Each place has its own.
And that'll come from your recipe, your yeast strain, the way you distill, and some of it literally just comes from where your distillery is located. Every distillery has its own little micro biome that's going on with your bacteria that's living around there, the environment as far as the pressure, where you sit up on a hill, down in a valley.
Yeah.
All that will affect your overall product.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Again, Bruce, for sitting and talking to me today, and thank you so much for inviting me over to Kentucky. It's been a great couple of days. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Glad to have you here.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.